The airport smelled of stale coffee and jet fuel, a familiar hum of wheels on tiles and distant announcements echoing overhead. I tightened my grip on Bronx's small hand, watching him wobble under the weight of 5 pieces of luggage that should have been carried by grown adults. My chest tightened, a mixture of shock and disbelief flooding me. How could they do this to him, my little boy, only 8, struggling with bags that made him stumble? I scanned the terminal, searching for airport staff who might intervene, though I knew instinctively that authority meant little when family cruelty was involved. My parents' messages blinked on my phone in the group chat. Come get her. We're boarding now. Cold, detached. And my mother's follow-up, sharper than steel. Don't make us feel guilty, she needs to learn a lesson. A lesson. For what? For existing? For being part of this family? The disbelief made my stomach twist, and protective instincts surged like fire. I gritted my teeth, feeling the absurdity of the scene mix with a rising tide of fury, my mind racing for solutions as Bronx's small legs quivered under the load. I hesitated a heartbeat, calculating, knowing any rash move could escalate the situation publicly, embarrass Bronx, or worse, provoke my parents further. Memories flooded, birthdays overlooked, small kindnesses dismissed, favoritism granted to others, my quiet frustrations swallowed whole over the years. Each recollection sharpened the current outrage. My fingers clutched the boarding pass tighter, a tiny piece of paper that felt like my only tether to control in the chaos. Checking my phone again, I reviewed contingency plans, mapping routes through crowded terminals, noting the nearest staff desks, gauging where I could intervene without causing a scene that would backfire. Anxiety twisted with moral outrage, yet a strategic calm settled over me. I had to protect him, but I couldn't let anger dictate my actions. Then the decision crystallized. I had to act. Pushing through the swell of travelers, my heart hammered in my chest as I spotted Bronx near the luggage carousel, his back stooped, face red with effort and humiliation. Twist S1 revealed itself in brutal clarity. My parents had orchestrated this, forcing him to carry every bag as a calculated lesson. The sheer audacity, the cruelty of their design, ignited a spark of fury I could barely contain. I approached the airline staff cautiously, polite but firm, explaining the situation, knowing their intervention might be limited but hoping for a sliver of support. Each step brought me closer to my son, my mind racing for strategies, how to relieve him without a public confrontation that would humiliate him further, how to act without giving my parents any satisfaction. The terminal blurred, tension rising, every movement synchronized with a surge of protective determination. My gaze fell on Bronx's boarding pass, tucked between his fingers, fluttering slightly as he shifted the weight of another suitcase. It anchored me to something deeper than this single moment. I remembered the first time I had felt overlooked in this family, a memory of being small, ignored, dismissed. That boarding pass, now in his hands, was a symbol of resilience, of quiet endurance, a subtle promise that this pattern could be broken. Nostalgia mingled with simmering resolve. I allowed myself a fraction of hope, a glimmer that this moment could be a turning point. The chaos around us faded into background noise, the emotional weight pressing down yet sharpening my focus, turning uncertainty into intent. I reached the luggage area, just a few steps behind my parents, their indifferent strides a stark contrast to Bronx's strained movements. The realization of their calculated cruelty hit me fully. This was no accident, no oversight. A deliberate imposition, a statement cloaked in parental authority. My mind raced, weighing options, confront them here and risk a scene, or maneuver him away quietly, preserve his dignity, and assert control in a way that was deliberate, precise. Every instinct screamed to defend him, every muscle tensed in preparation. I clenched my jaw, gripping Bronx's hand, feeling the tremor of his small body beneath mine. One step at a time, I moved closer, ready to confront them, to protect him from a lesson he never asked for, to shield his innocence from the casual cruelty of those who should have been his champions. I weaved through the sea of travelers, Bronx's small hand clutched tightly in mine, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every step felt like a battle against time itself. Ahead, my parents strolled with practiced nonchalance, as if the world, and certainly my son's struggle, was irrelevant to them. Each suitcase he tottered under seemed to mock me, amplifying my sense of injustice. My lungs burned, and adrenaline coursed through my veins, sharpening my focus. I scanned the surroundings for any sign of help, but in a place bustling with strangers, authority was of fleeting hope. I had to act, now, before the calculated cruelty became irreversible. The airport's hum, the rolling carts, the distant announcements, the clatter of shoes on tile, faded into background noise, leaving only the pounding rhythm of my resolve. My mind flashed through scenarios, weighing risks and potential consequences, every instinct screaming to protect him. I would not let my child bear a burden designed for adult indifference. I paused just long enough to strategize. Confronting my parents directly risked a public scene that could humiliate Bronx further, yet, inaction was unthinkable. My thoughts raced, recalling patterns of neglect, the countless times I had been dismissed, overlooked, or made invisible in my own family. Each memory ignited a deeper urgency to act with precision. I noted the nearest airline counter, security personnel, and any open spaces that might allow me to shield Bronx while regaining some control. My emotions oscillated between frustration and determination, tightening my focus. With every step, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would maneuver, and how to protect him without escalating the spectacle. The moral outrage fueled a calm, calculated strategy, a silent promise to my son that I would not let him be humiliated for the sake of a lesson he never asked to learn. I approached the airline personnel with a polite firmness, my voice steady despite the rising tide of anger. I explained the situation succinctly, careful to maintain composure while signaling urgency. The staff exchanged glances, polite yet uncertain, aware of the delicate balance between customer service and family matters. My parents, meanwhile, maintained a facade of innocence, smiling as if nothing was amiss, orchestrating the scenario like a performance of cold authority. The power imbalance was palpable, each gesture from them calculated, a subtle reminder that in this family, appearances mattered more than decency. I felt a simmering anger rise, the injustice of it all tightening my chest. I watched Bronx strain under the weight of the bags, his small frame bending, his expression a mixture of effort and confusion. Every passing second magnified the stakes. I had to act decisively. As I maneuvered closer, I recalled moments from my past where I had quietly asserted boundaries in smaller conflicts, memories that now became anchors for my strength. Each recollection bolstered my determination, providing a blueprint for action without yielding to reckless impulse. The boarding pass in Bronx's hand flickered in my peripheral vision, a symbol of resilience and a subtle reminder that even the smallest tokens could represent empowerment. My resolve solidified, internal tension transforming into focused energy. I would protect him, and I would do it with the clarity and intelligence that years of experience demanded. The terminal's chaos became a stage for my deliberate strategy, each movement calculated, each glance purposeful. Parents began advancing toward the gate, and I realized hesitation was no longer an option. I adjusted my pace, threading through travelers with a silent urgency, ensuring Bronx stayed close and shielded from prying eyes. My mind anticipated their reactions, ready for feigned innocence or dismissive remarks, prepared to counter with measured, assertive action. Every heartbeat matched the rhythm of my racing thoughts, moral outrage and protective instinct coalesced into a singular drive. I tightened my grip on Bronx and darted ahead, weaving between passengers and luggage carts, determined to intercept them before the situation escalated beyond what any child should endure. The air was thick with tension, and every step brought me closer to asserting the justice Bronx deserved, my resolve unshakable in the face of orchestrated cruelty. I moved through the terminal with measured steps, keeping Bronx close, his small hand firmly in mine, while my eyes stayed locked on my parents. They laughed lightly, exchanging quiet jokes that seemed innocent on the surface, yet I knew better. The calculated ease in their movements, the subtle manipulations I'd seen for years, simmered beneath my skin, igniting a controlled fury. Every step I took was a balance between stealth and intent. I couldn't afford to escalate publicly, but I couldn't let them treat my son like this either. My mind replayed countless instances of their favoritism and dismissiveness, the invisible weight that always placed on me, and now on Bronx. I drew a deep breath, steadying the rush of emotion, preparing to assert authority without giving them the satisfaction of public shame. Approaching the gate agent, I leaned in just enough to whisper, signaling that something was amiss with how my son's luggage was being handled. My parents smiled and nodded as if nothing was happening, yet every gesture and glance they shared toward Bronx revealed their orchestrated cruelty. I felt shock ripple through me, indignation simmering, yet I stayed poised, using subtle eye contact and quiet gestures with the staff to create leverage. The tempo of my movements accelerated, the stakes were high, and every second mattered. I watched the subtle interactions, the shift of luggage weight, the glances of passing passengers, the rolling hum of suitcases, all pieces of a puzzle that required careful navigation. Bronx looked up at me with uncertainty, and I gave a reassuring squeeze of his hand, silently promising him safety. In that moment, memories and lessons flooded my mind, words from mentors about standing up for what's right, quotes from figures who had faced injustice with courage, and even small victories I had claimed in past conflicts. They anchored me, steadied my determination amidst the chaos. I noticed minor details, the distant murmur of travelers, overhead announcements, the glint of sunlight on metal rails, the echo of rolling suitcases. Each sensory note became a marker, guiding my movements, giving structure to my strategy, helping me maintain composure while planning my next step. My resolve hardened. This was no longer just about luggage, it was about protecting Bronx and asserting a moral boundary that had been violated for too long. I stepped closer, allowing my presence to register without raising my voice. My parents' expressions, smug and feigned innocent, stoked my internal moral outrage. Yet I maintained calm, speaking in measured tones, every word carrying authority without raising spectacle. Small supporting figures, the airport staff nearby, observed quietly, potential allies whose presence reinforced my position without confrontation. I adjusted my stance subtly, keeping Bronx shielded while signaling that their manipulation would not go unnoticed. Each microaction, gesture, glance, stance, was deliberate, a silent assertion of control over a situation they sought to dominate. As they prepared to board, urgency surged. My grip on Bronx tightened, my mind racing to calculate the precise moment and manner to intervene. I could not afford hesitation. The path to protect him and uphold what was right required immediate, deliberate action. The confrontation hovered at the threshold of action, the tension palpable, my awareness sharpened by the high stakes and moral clarity guiding every decision. I inhaled deeply, steeling myself, every fiber of my being focused on the task ahead, confront them directly, protect Bronx, and assert a moral line they had long ignored. In that split second, strategy and determination merged. I was ready to cross the threshold and face them, no longer a silent observer to their cruelty. I held Bronx close, watching my parents with a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. Their movements were subtle, calculated, each step and whispered word aimed at orchestrating exhaustion for my son. They spoke softly to the staff, nudging him to carry one bag after another, layering their manipulation with smiles and feigned casualness. My protective instincts flared, a low, simmering fire that demanded I act, yet I kept my voice quiet and my steps measured, analyzing every detail of their deceit. Past incidents of neglect and favoritism flashed through my mind, each one a reminder of the patterns I was now witnessing again, more malicious than ever. The emotional weight pressed down, but I forced myself to focus on strategy, resisting the urge to explode in the crowded terminal. I weighed my options, calculating the best way to protect Bronx without triggering public embarrassment or escalation. Confrontation was tempting, yet subtle intervention seemed wiser. My heart beat faster as the realization sank in. This was more than a lesson. They were setting him up to fail, to be humiliated in front of strangers. I rehearsed phrases, silent gestures, and discreet signals, coordinating with the few sympathetic staff nearby. Determination hardened within me, my mind racing through every possible angle, every contingency, while I maintained the calm exterior necessary to keep control. Bronx sensed my resolve, clinging a little tighter to my hand, and I whispered instructions, small reassurances to keep him steady and focused. Stepping forward, I spoke firmly yet controlled, questioning my parents' instructions and their intentions without raising my voice. They acted startled, but the subtle sabotage continued, each gesture reinforcing their antagonist role. Anxiety pressed at me, but I held it at bay, using strategy to guide every interaction. The minor reactions of patrons around us added layers of realism, their glances and subtle shifts making the stakes feel even higher. My movements were deliberate, my words precise, creating a slow power shift while keeping Bronx protected in my shadow. I could feel the tension crackling, a tightrope between exposure and control, and I balanced every step with intention. Bronx hesitated under the weight of their manipulation, confusion and strain evident in his small frame. I crouched slightly, meeting his eyes, offering guidance and encouragement through whispered words and a reassuring squeeze of his hand. Empathy surged alongside my rising hope. I reminded myself that protecting him went beyond physical intervention, it was also about preserving his dignity and sense of security. The connection we shared in that moment anchored me, turning my moral outrage into actionable resolve. Each micro-gesture, each gentle instruction, reinforced our bond and strengthened my determination to navigate this hostile environment effectively. As they signaled for boarding, the urgency intensified. I tightened my grip on Bronx, feeling the pulse of adrenaline and moral necessity surge through me. Their hidden betrayal was now fully visible, and the stakes could not be ignored any longer. Every plan, every whispered signal, every strategic movement had led to this critical moment. I steeled myself for decisive action, knowing that in the next heartbeat, I had to assert authority, protect my son, and expose their calculated cruelty. The terminal seemed to hold its breath with us, the tension electric, as I prepared to cross the final threshold and confront the deception head-on. I didn't let go of Bronx's hand as we shifted from the boarding lounge into the open space by the corridor. The tension had moved with us, like a shadow that grew heavier with every step. I glanced over my shoulder and saw my parents still whispering to the gate agent, pretending to fix something about their tickets. But I wasn't watching their lips. I was watching their eyes. Focused. Calculating. Like they were managing a performance. One they'd rehearsed. And then it hit me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment trick. This was layered. Intentional. A string of manipulations that stretched back further than this trip. From how they'd baited Bronx with false promises to how they dumped expectations on him like it was normal. I thought of the way my mother always pretended to forget Bronx's allergies at family dinners. How my dad always had something too heavy for Bronx to carry, and conveniently vanished when help was needed. This wasn't parental cluelessness. It was control dressed up as chaos. And now, I was watching it unfold again. Bronx was shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his arms sore from the bags they'd shoved at him. He didn't complain. That's what made it worse. He was trying to be strong, to not cause trouble. Exactly how they wanted him. I could feel it rising, defiance. Not loud. Not dramatic. But steady. Clear. This ends here. I moved closer to him and whispered, "You okay?" He nodded, too fast. "Yeah, it's fine." "It's not," I said. Calm, but solid. "And we're not letting it slide this time." I took a breath and weighed my next move. Should I go full confrontation, in front of everyone? Or take it sideways, quiet, but cutting? The problem was Bronx. I couldn't drag him through something messy. But if I let this go, I'd be part of it. Again. I scanned the nearby staff. One of the female attendants had been keeping an eye on me since earlier. She'd seen something. Maybe she couldn't name it, but she'd felt it. I caught her gaze and gave the smallest nod. She gave it back. That was enough. Someone else knew. And that helped. I turned back, calculating every word I was about to use like I was stacking stones. They had to land right. No shaking. No escalation. Just facts. I walked toward my parents. Bronx stayed behind me. I felt him flinch slightly. I squeezed his hand once before letting go. Mom noticed me first. "Oh, Zaylee, honey, we were just..." I cut in. "No. Stop." Dad straightened up. That faux-polite tension spread across his face. "What's going on?" I kept my tone steady. "You've been piling extra luggage on Bronx since we arrived. Every stop. Every excuse. You two talk to staff behind our backs, arrange things to make him carry what you won't. You act like it's coincidence. It's not. It's a pattern." They looked stunned. Not because they were caught. Because I was breaking script. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mom said. "We asked him if he could help. He said yes." "He's 14, I snapped. "You're not supposed to burden him so you can glide through like royalty. You didn't ask. You dumped." People were looking now. A man across the aisle paused his phone call. The gate agent froze mid-type. Dad's voice dropped into that warning register I knew too well. "Let's not make a scene." "You already did," I said. For a beat, no one moved. My hands were steady. My voice didn't shake. And in that stillness, they knew I wasn't bluffing anymore. My parents looked to each other, then to me. Then they tried their favorite move, playing dumb. "I guess we misjudged," Dad said. "Didn't realize it was such a big deal." "It is," I replied. I didn't wait for them to defend themselves. I turned toward the staff member who'd been watching. Quietly, I asked if she could help move Bronx's bags to a cart. She nodded and walked off. Bronx exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. I looked at him. "You don't have to carry everyone else's weight. You hear me?" His face cracked, just slightly. "Yeah." He moved closer to me. I rested my hand on his back, feeling him breathe a little easier. We waited together as the bags were carted off. No more pressure on his arms. No more pretending he was okay. Then came the announcement. Boarding was starting. I turned my head slowly, catching the sight of my parents standing stiff, annoyed that they hadn't won this round. Their smiles were gone. Bronx reached for my hand. And as we stepped forward, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't letting it slide again. I tightened my grip on Bronx's hand, knowing I couldn't wait another second to take control. I didn't wait. As soon as I felt Bronx's shoulders slump under the weight, I acted. Crowds parted slightly as I stepped into the open, voice firm and clear, "Let him drop the extra bag." Heads turned. The staff nearby froze for a moment. My parents' faces flickered, first surprise, then a masked composure. Twist S6 showed itself. Despite my confrontation yesterday, they were doubling down, escalating silently. The terminal's clamor receded. All that mattered was this moment. I guided Bronx toward a less crowded area, issuing calm directives. "Stay here," I whispered to him, "I'll handle this." My fallback plans activated in my mind if they pushed back. I stood between Bronx and my parents, meeting their eyes without flinching. I sidestepped around baggage carts and clusters of travelers, keeping Bronx close and protected. I listened to whispered murmurs around us and gauged the staff's glances. I collected evidence quietly, boarded pass in Bronx's hand, luggage tags, his weakened stance. Every detail mattered. I maintained decorum, no spectacle, no reckless outburst, while exerting my presence. I moved deliberately, asserting space, nodding to sympathetic staff, subtly aligning them with us. Each step was calculated: walk this path, block that angle, shield him while gathering leverage. I felt the hum of tension in the air. My parents' composure slipped. The frustration showed in the tension in their jaw, in the slight hesitation of their step. Bronx saw me standing firm. Twist S6, their authority, once assumed, began to crack under the weight of their own design. I calmly named each grievance. You've asked him to carry too much. This wasn't an accident, laying out facts rather than accusations. Bronx straightened. His eyes reflected surprise and something like pride. I held my ground. They faltered. Bronx wavered, confusion in his gaze. I crouched, whispered, "You're doing great. We'll get through this." He nodded. In that connection, I felt steadied. I thought back to every small dismissal I'd endured, and drew resolve. We would face this together. My intelligence, my calm, my strategy, these were my weapons. He needed to see that. I reinforced his confidence, silently anchoring him with presence. They tightened grouping, preparing to board, launching a hidden salvo. My muscles tensed. The next move must hit hard. I clenched Bronx's hand, ready for whatever came. The control had begun shifting. I braced for their counter in the next second, believing I could turn their next move into their biggest mistake. I stood near the boarding gate, close enough to watch my parents' every move, far enough to keep Bronx out of the line of fire. I wasn't breathing through my chest anymore. Everything was tight, cold, clenched. Bronx sat beside me, his backpack slipping from his shoulder. I adjusted it, then my gaze locked back onto them. They were louder now. Smiling wide. Performing. "Bronx needs to stop being so soft," my mother said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. I didn't flinch. Instead, I calmly stepped forward, my voice clear. "That's enough. You're not going to embarrass my son to make yourself feel superior." My dad blinked, fake confused. "Zaylee, nobody's embarrassing anyone. You've been doing it all morning," I cut in. Every instruction meant to burden him. Every comment meant to belittle. "We see it. And so do they." I gestured subtly to the onlookers beginning to take interest. My mother's smile faded, her hand clutching her purse tighter. "You're imagining things." "No," I replied. "I'm finally seeing them clearly." I didn't shout. Didn't cry. That seemed to throw them off more than if I had. They'd expected outbursts, drama. I gave them calculation. Decency. Control. As more eyes turned toward us, my mother shifted her stance. My father exhaled, glanced at the gate agent, then back at me like he was preparing for a last swing. I took Bronx's hand. "We're not here to be quiet anymore." I pulled him gently with me to a bench farther from the crowd, keeping my eyes on them. Then I started watching more closely, how they whispered when they thought no one was looking. The way their phones were angled when texting. The way my mother double-checked a boarding pass in her coat pocket, twice. That's when I saw it. They had a second boarding pass. Not for Bronx. Just for them. That wasn't a family trip. It was a setup. I kept my body still, but my mind was cataloging every detail: timestamps on messages, matching bag tags, whispered code between them that sounded like stall and flip. I snapped a photo of the pass when they set it down. Bronx didn't notice. His head was resting against my shoulder, eyes half closed. I tucked a strand of his hair behind his ear. They never planned to take him with them. They just wanted to make it look like I couldn't handle him. They wanted witnesses. Just enough stress to spark a meltdown, then swoop in and claim I wasn't fit. God. I looked down at Bronx, then back up. No more internal battles. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was war. I stood. Walked back over to them. Don't, I said firmly. Don't say another word unless you're prepared to hear the truth in front of everyone here. My mother blinked. My dad crossed his arms. You've been using him, I continued, quieter now, so only they could hear. Pushing him. Watching for the cracks. All for what? To prove I'm unfit? My dad smirked. You always did love playing the victim, Zay. That name. That smirk. That's when it hit me, this had nothing to do with Bronx. This was about punishing me. You're gonna walk into that gate, I said slowly, and for once, you're going to do it alone. Because I'm not following. And neither is he. Then I turned. Didn't wait for a reply. Bronx looked up at me, confused. What's happening? We're staying right here, I told him, my voice soft but clear. Together. His eyes searched mine. Then, quietly, he said, okay. We sat again. A few feet away, the gate agent began announcing final boarding. That's when my mother raised her voice. Well, if something happens to him, don't come crying to us. It was loud enough to draw looks. Some people shook their heads. One woman looked at me with pity. But I didn't react. I leaned down to Bronx. You want some water? He nodded. As I got up, I noticed the gate agent watching us, brows furrowed, unsure. I nodded politely, then turned toward the snack kiosk. They weren't done. I heard hurried steps behind me. My dad's voice, too close. You think you've won something here? He hissed. I stopped. Turned around. No, I said. I think I finally stopped losing. He stared at me. Cold. Blank. Then turned and walked back. I returned to Bronx with a bottle. Handed it to him. We okay? I asked. He took a sip. Then smiled, weak but real. Yeah. My heart clenched. Then, just as I was starting to exhale, I noticed movement. They were talking to security. Waving their arms. The agent's eyes found mine. Something was coming. I inhaled deeply, knowing that their next move would finally meet the consequences they deserved. By the time we reached the boarding area again, I could feel the air shift. The tension wasn't just in my chest, it buzzed through the crowd like static. My parents stood there, calm on the surface, but I knew that calm. It was the kind they used right before pulling something underhanded. Bronx stayed close to my side, gripping my sleeve tight enough to leave wrinkles. I glanced down and gave his hand a gentle squeeze, trying to pass some steadiness into him even though my own heart was pounding. I saw it the moment it happened, the sudden call to one of the airport supervisors, the theatrical urgency in my mother's voice. She didn't even bother to look my way as she leaned in, whispering something with concern painted all over her face. That fake concern. My stomach turned, but I kept my posture. Within seconds, a uniformed staff member was approaching me, clipboard in hand, polite but firm. "Ma'am, I've been asked to check on a concern raised about the welfare of your child." There it was. I exhaled slowly, just once. "Of course," I said. "Let's step aside and talk." We moved off near a seating nook just beyond the gate. Bronx looked at me with wide eyes. I bent to meet him at eye level. "You're okay. This isn't about you. It's about control. Stay with me." He nodded, chest rising fast, but he didn't look away. I turned back toward the staff member. "I have nothing to hide. In fact, I'd like to share something." I pulled out the printouts I'd tucked into my carry-on sleeve, copies of our boarding passes, timestamps, my text threads with my parents, even a photo of Bronx's school medical form they had conveniently forgotten existed when they tried to paint me as negligent. All of it organized. I held each out calmly, explaining their significance in a voice that didn't waver. The man's eyes flicked over the papers, his expression unreadable but alert. Behind him, I could see my father watching from a distance, arms crossed, jaw tight. I knew the next step. I showed the short video I had discreetly recorded earlier that morning, Bronx trying to carry both his and my mother's luggage while they walked ahead, unconcerned. His little arms were shaking under the weight. "This is what they call concern," I said, my voice low but sharp. "He's not being protected by them. He's being used." The man looked at Bronx, now calmer, standing beside me, and then back at the phone. He nodded. "Thank you for your cooperation, ma'am. We won't need to follow this further." When he walked away, I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just sat down next to Bronx, who leaned against me like a kid who finally felt like he could stop holding his breath. Across the aisle, my parents stood frozen. They hadn't expected me to play their game better than them. My mother's lips twitched, trying to form a new angle. My father avoided my eyes completely. I didn't need to say anything. The people sitting nearby had seen enough. I'd spoken calmly, I'd stood my ground, and I'd proven them wrong using nothing but the truth. Bronx turned toward me. "You're not scared, are you?" I met his eyes. "Not anymore." We moved to a quieter spot near the VIP lounge. He curled beside me, eating a small sandwich one of the flight attendants had quietly handed us. I let the silence linger a while. Then I ran my fingers through his hair and said softly, "You remember when I told you not everyone who smiles means well?" He nodded. "Well, today you saw it. But more important, you saw how we respond. With truth. With calm. With clarity." His eyes stayed on me, but something had shifted. He wasn't just leaning on me, he was watching me, learning. I thought back to all the years I'd sat silent, doubting my gut because of who they were and what they said love looked like. But love isn't supposed to manipulate. It doesn't try to make you small so it can feel big. I'd let them write the rules for too long. Not anymore. A little while later, I saw my parents huddled in a corner, whispering furiously. My mother's hand waved in a sharp motion. My father's face was a mask, stone cold, but his eyes darted toward me now and then. And then they walked toward us again. Slow. Controlled. But their smiles weren't polished anymore. They looked tired. She stopped a few feet away and said, voice low, "You made a mistake today." I tilted my head. No. I made a choice. My father chuckled dryly. You think this is over? I stood, placed my arm gently behind Bronx. No. I think it's finally beginning. They stood there for a second longer. then turned, walking back toward the gate. Bronx tugged my sleeve. "What do we do now?" I looked ahead, chin firm. "We stay ready. They'll try again, but next time, we don't flinch." As we walked away, I knew the real challenge wasn't over, and the truth would demand its final reckoning. The air outside the airport was heavy, thick with the weight of everything unsaid, everything exposed. I didn't look back. Bronx held tight to my hand, his small fingers wrapped in mine like he knew the war wasn't over, even if the battle had just been won. We walked slow, not because we were tired, but because we were finally free to. I noticed how he kept glancing up at me, like I'd turned into something he didn't quite recognize, but respected. "You didn't even yell, Mom," he said, quiet. "You just knew what to do." I smiled but didn't say much. My throat still held onto too many words I hadn't let out. Instead, I squeezed his hand a little tighter. Not in fear. In signal. The ride back to the house was quiet. I kept the windows cracked just enough to let real air in. I needed it, fresh, honest air that didn't carry their voices. Once inside, I checked the locks twice. Not because I expected them to show up, but because they'd trained me to never feel truly safe. That was about to change. The next morning, I made the call. Legal aid. Then the courthouse. Then Child Protective Services. Not out of anger, but clarity. They wanted to play games with power. I was done playing. Every document I'd saved, every voice memo, text, timestamped detail, I laid it out neatly. I didn't dramatize. I didn't beg. I presented. At the courthouse, the air was different. Cold in a way that makes you sit up straight. I stood in front of the intake clerk with Bronx by my side, my voice calm. She glanced between us, then down at the files. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes shifted, like maybe she saw what I was doing. And why? They were served papers the next afternoon. I found out through an attorney's assistant who sounded too young to have seen this kind of pain in a mother's voice. She paused halfway through a sentence and asked, "Are you sure you want to keep going?" I almost laughed. I said, "I'm just now starting." The hearing wasn't dramatic. They came in pretending like nothing had happened. Dad wore that same tie he always wore to church. Mom clutched her purse like it was a lifeline. But the judge wasn't blind. Neither was the public defender, or the court clerk, or the bailiff. You could feel it, truth has a temperature. And the room got warmer every time I spoke. Bronx stayed in the hallway with a social worker. I didn't want him hearing any more lies. But when it was over, and the temporary protective order was granted, and the judge said, "Your actions do not reflect parental interest, nor stability," I finally exhaled. That night, at home, I found Bronx drawing at the kitchen table. He looked up and said, "Does this mean they can't come back?" I sat beside him. "It means we decide what happens next," I told him. That was the truth. It didn't mean we were untouchable. It meant we were no longer trapped. Over the next few weeks, things started to shift. Quietly. I noticed it first in the grocery store. An old woman in the cereal aisle nodded at me like she'd seen the news. Then at the bank, someone said, "You're the one who stood up to her parents, right?" There was no fanfare. Just small recognitions. But they mattered. My parents didn't speak to me after the court date. That wasn't surprising. What surprised me was how okay I was with it. Bronx and I started setting new routines. Breakfast at the same diner on Saturdays. Homework at the park when the weather was good. He started asking questions about my childhood, not just the facts, but the emotions. I answered honestly. I told him some people get better when they're called out. Some don't. But that doesn't mean we stop calling it out. One evening, he asked, "Do you think they'll ever say sorry?" I sat with that a long time. Then said, "Maybe. But we don't need it to move on." That was true, even if it still hurt. One Sunday, my neighbor, Mr. Caldwell, knocked on my door with a warm peach pie and said, "Not everyone could have handled that the way you did." It was dignified. It was brave. I thanked him. But more than that, I remembered every time someone had told me to just keep peace or be the bigger person. That wasn't peace. That was silence. There's a difference. We never went back to being a normal family. There was no reunion dinner, no teary apology. Just a clean break. Some people called it sad. I called it honest. As fall approached, Bronx started 6th grade. His teacher emailed me to say, "He's incredibly thoughtful. Analytical beyond his age." I read it twice. I felt it in my chest, how far we'd come. He wasn't scared anymore. Neither was I. One night, after dinner, we sat outside watching the sky turn pink over the rooftops. He leaned against my arm and said, "I think we're gonna be okay now." And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed it. As we closed the door behind us, I finally felt free, knowing the battle had taught us more than any words ever could.